Welcome to Direct Approach with Wayne Moorehead, an exclusive podcast brought to you by Direct Selling News. Host Wayne Moorehead, a DSU audience favorite, interviews some of the leading marketers and innovators in direct selling to help your marketing and branding teams motivate the field, inspire customers, and further your brand's reach and impact. In today's episode, Wayne is joined by Amber Olson Rourke, co-founder and chief sales and marketing officer at Neora. Amber leads brand strategy, product development, creative services, sales, PR, communications, digital marketing, social media, and events. She is also the president of the Neora Ripple Foundation, which has raised over $5 million for organizations such as Big Brothers Big Sisters and World Vision. Wayne and Amber discuss how keeping a streamlined product portfolio helps build brand equity and reputation, and they'll share the lessons they've learned about trusting their instincts. Finally, they'll give their take on how the pandemic has allowed the channel's most tech-savvy companies to bring their customers even closer to their brands. Be sure to listen to Amber's key takeaways on building a meaningful, memorable customer experience at every touchpoint. She's got the must-have action items you need to seamlessly move from contact to conversion. This is definitely an episode you can't afford to miss. Now, a word from our sponsor.
Your brand can live in the hearts and minds of all kinds of people in many places. Today's marketplace is driven by storytelling and personal connections made with brands like yours. Now Tech provides you the future of marketing through a beautifully designed video and e-commerce suite. Now's video commerce technology gives your customers a truly seamless buying experience, which increases your cart value and boosts sales. Did you know? Viewers retain 95% of a video's message. 96% of shoppers rely on product videos when making a buying decision. 84% of people say they've been convinced to buy after watching a brand's video presentation. A video commerce customer reported a 358% increase in customer acquisition and 230% revenue growth. Storytelling and personal connections have always been at the heart of successful direct selling companies. Our video technology gives your brand the opportunity to influence, teach, and inspire the world. Now Tech. Proven technology from a trusted partner with 35 years of experience. Let's talk 310-428-9936 or email us at info@now-tech.com.
And here's your host, Wayne Moorehead, and today's guest, Amber Olson Rourke, co-founder and chief marketing and sales officer at Neora.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Direct Approach. I'm your host, Wayne Moorehead, and we have a very special guest today who is the co-founder and chief sales and marketing officer of Neora, Amber Olson Rourke. Amber, welcome to Direct Approach.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Good to see you today.
Yeah, you as well. Again, thank you very much for taking the time. I've followed your career for a lot of years now. We've had the chance to meet at a lot of industry events and other venues. And again, just really impressive career, really excited to talk to you today and kind of learn a little bit more about how you think about marketing and strategy. And we'll get into some specifics here. But would love to kick it off learning a little bit more about the path that led you to Neora. Now, you had been around direct selling your entire life, and you chose to go a little bit of a different path and went more of the traditional marketing and advertising route. You were at a big, well-known agency that's done a lot of campaigns that we would all recognize very well. So was there a moment or some type of catalyst where you decided to kind of leave that more traditional marketing role and swing into direct selling? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, of course. So, as you mentioned, since the time I was 5, I was around the direct sales industry, and my parents were in the industry in multiple capacities. So coming out of college, I specifically didn't want to work in the direct sales industry. I kind of had this vision of creating my own clear path. And that was something that was more my parents' thing. And so, initially went that direction. And I really did. I loved so much about it and learned so much going that path. But I found that in, traditional advertising or marketing, you're so kind of far removed from that end customer. You never meet them. You never talk to them. You never really see how your product is changing their lives or impacting their lives. And I realized over time that I really wanted that. I wanted to be much closer to the person using the product that I was marketing. So really the people side of direct sales is always what really I loved growing up in the industry, and what I think ultimately attracted me back to it is to be able to have that closeness to the people actually using and loving your products.
Yeah, that's true. In the agency world, it might be the insights group or kind of the strategy team that gets to talk to consumers, and then maybe downstream a little bit as the campaigns developed. Some validation occurs with focus groups, but it is really limited. Almost all your interaction is going to be with the client. And so even though they're coming to you for insights on the end user, on the consumer, that is interesting. I hadn't thought about how far removed, the agency world is from kind of that end user. Also, that's one of the things I love about direct selling as well, is just that energy you get from working directly with the sales channel and interacting with the end consumer. So as I kind of mentioned when we kicked off, you've had a very impressive career. One of the things that I think is really cool is you had the opportunity relatively early in your career to have a significant role, to take on a CMO role. And that's one of the areas where we had a little bit of similarity from a career standpoint. Early on, I left one of the large direct selling companies to join a startup. I think that's really kind of the scale of the company, where someone like me that, maybe only had 8 or 9 years of marketing experience got to lead a marketing group. For me, it was about the opportunity to build a brand from scratch and to kind of have an impact, at a really large scale. One of the things that was very intimidating to me was that all of the other execs were like a decade or two older than me. And it took me a little while to get really comfortable in my role. And, at times, even had, probably moments what we would classify as, imposter syndrome. Are they going to figure me out? Are they going to send me back to the old company? But I'd love to know a little bit from you. What was that experience like for you being a young CMO? Did you ever have any of those like, oh crap moments? Or was it intimidating anyway? Or did it just feel kind of normal? How did you deal with that? Taking a lot of responsibility early on.
So that's a great question. We had very similar experiences. So for the most part at the beginning, we were, in total startup mode. So I had, I think 2 marketing team members at launch. We had about 7 total employees at launch. Maybe we had about 20 employees when we hit $100 million in revenue. So we were a very small team. So at that time, I don't think I really had the time to digest it. It was just so chaotic that you're just running 1,000 miles a minute and just go, go, go. But then as the organization matured and we had more, processes in place and more experienced team members, it definitely was intimidating, at times being the youngest in an executive type meeting by 20 plus years. So I think for me, how this showed up the most is when we be kind of debating an important decision, and I would have a strong kind of gut feel about something, which isn't all the time, right? There's lots of decisions you make where that's not the case, but there were very specific times where I had a really strong gut feel about a certain direction that I thought was the right direction. And I would offer my opinion, but if everyone that had more, quote unquote experience than me felt a different way, I would kind of immediately drop it, because I would think, well, they must, know more than I do. They must have seen this before. They must have, some kind of experience that I don't have. So let's go with that. And what I learned over the years is the mass majority of the time, when I did have that strong gut feeling about a certain direction, it was right. So I got to see all these times play out where we went a different direction, and I didn't feel like I really showed up fully to represent my opinion in that scenario. So over time, I got more and more confident in that gut feeling that was always there. and started to really kind of plant my flag when I really felt like I had a strong feeling about a certain direction. I wouldn't back down just because someone else might disagree that had more experience. And I think that was the biggest thing I really had to work through.
That's really interesting. Again, super similar, experience for me as well. As you tend to go through more cycles, more and more decisions, more time goes by, and you see that maybe that gut instinct or that strategy that you wanted to implement, was the right move. It definitely starts building up that confidence. Again, that was something that I noticed. I read recently a really interesting article on imposter syndrome. They were talking about, how many celebrities and famous people that we would all be familiar with have experienced this at times. And they said as much as about 70% of people,
Wow.
are going to experience some level of imposter syndrome. And that usually comes as you're doing things that you've never done before. So they were looking at it as actually kind of a good sign, that you're on the right path, you're going down the right track, you're putting yourself out there, you're taking on challenges that you haven't done 1,000 times. And so it's very natural, it's normal, which to me is really validating. But again, it also is just a signal that you're probably on the right path. So
That's great perspective.
I'd be interested to know, so, you started out as a CMO role, you've continued to take on more and more responsibility. Did you experience kind of a similar dynamic when you took on the sales responsibility as well? Or, had there been, enough cycles that, you didn't really get nervous, you just kind of picked it up and ran with it?
Yeah, it's interesting because in that scenario, sales and marketing work so closely together. So I had been through so many decision cycles where even on the sales side, I had a certain instinct, and maybe, I got to see how that played out right over the years. And so when that time came and I took over that role, I think I was really ready. I had a clear vision of what we needed to do, a clear vision of who our field was. And so that was one of the most fun transitions in my entire career, because it was like, at that point, almost 8 years of a kind of absorbing all of that. And then finally, always contributing to it, but kind of then getting in the seat and taking the reins to implement everything I'd been thinking about for 8 years.
That's really interesting. Yes, definitely over time, it's going to make kind of taking on that added responsibility, I think, a little bit easier, with each new role. So Neora has been around for a lot of years now, has had tremendous success. It was one of the fastest growing companies in the channel. So now that you have that experience, that, you have gone through all those decision cycles, as you mentioned, what's the piece of advice that you would love to give yourself when, day one, when you took on that CMO role? What's the one thing that you wish you had known at that point?
Obviously trusting your instincts sooner would be a great one.
Sure.
But I also think don't wait to be told to lead, just lead would be a big one, because there's a lot of times, where you're transitioning kind of from an employee kind of mentality where you're taking the direction and you're executing it, to really stepping in fully into that leadership role, not waiting for someone to ask you to fill in a certain role or to do a certain project, but just, you don't have to wait for someone to ask you to lead or take on a responsibility. If you see a hole, fill it. If you see a need, meet it. And don't wait for someone else to tell you, just go ahead and lead where you see there needs leadership.
Absolutely. Just kind of take the ball and run with it. I know as I look back on my career, the times that I probably have the most regret are those times that I probably waited a little too long or felt like, somebody else should be, kind of initiating the strategy or this campaign. Again, as I look back, I'm like, crap, I should have just taken the ball and run with it. And, now I'd much rather be told no than be told, why aren't you doing this? Why haven't you taken the ball and run with it? So yeah, I'd much rather kind of, ask forgiveness than ask for permission now, for sure.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, that's a great insight. So I think one of the superpowers that you've had in your career and that you've really helped instill there at corporate with Neora, as well as in the field, is kind of this philosophy around creating experiences. And, coming from the brand side, I have agency experience as well. To me, it's all about those experiences to make sure that, every experience at every touch point is unique, it's memorable, it's emotional. And you've really focused on this, especially on the product side. So, you made the decision, the company made the decision very early on to have a very, very focused product line. It was really one product when you launched. And I feel, looking back, that Neuro was one of the first, social first, really socially driven brands in the direct selling space that understood that communication channel and how everyone was interacting and sharing. And so I'd love to know a little bit about how that informed, that initial, product strategy of that single product focus, and especially around a product where you can see and share the benefits really easy socially. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so definitely for us, a lot of things that we did when we launched, we kind of bet everything on the product experience. You're very right about that. Everything from the incentives, rewards we put in place was all betting that the product experience would drive, not just first-time customers, but loyal customers that became brand partners. So really started in investing in our product formulas, which definitely shows up on our cost of goods line. But for us, that's always been really important to have quality over quantity, and that each product creates its own unique experience. And so in the beginning, when we had just one product, people would pass out a full bottle of product, have someone take a before picture, use it for 5 days, and take an after picture. And that whole process was the entire cornerstone of our product sales strategy. And then they would show that to the person got to have that product experience themselves for 5 days. They got to see their own before and after pictures. And then the brand partner had a new set of before and after pictures to share on social media. So it transcended both online and offline of how they could really leverage that. And it was so simple and so repeatable, and it yielded great results. And we as a company funded a lot of programs to get those products in our brand partners' hands so that they could do kind of that 5-day trial demo. And so that philosophy has stayed the same over time. The application is obviously different as you expand, but that was really kind of how we started with the product experience.
So that really simple, focused experience really helped to drive a lot of the sales and that growth kind of initially, especially during, again, the incredible, again, kind of record-setting growth that Neora had in the early years. How did you kind of retain that simplicity? Because again, especially in direct selling, complexity equals friction, and friction, equals slower sales. So if you can keep it simple, if you can remove as much friction from the buying process, you're going to grow faster. So how did you help to keep things kind of simple and focused and remove as much complexity as you could as you continue to expand into new product categories?
Yeah, so we took a lot of the same philosophies and tried to adapt them as things grew. So, as we expanded, first of all, we continued our commitment to create formulas that would create some kind of result or experience. Sometimes it can't be an instant result. It's just an experience of the way their skin feels or the way that they feel, if it's a wellness product, but some kind of experience that would happen. That was always really important to us when we looked at what products we should add. And we've also remained very committed to a very streamlined product approach. So we're now in different categories: skincare, hair care, wellness, and weight management. But in each of those categories, we still, 10 years later, only have 4 to 9 products in each category. So we've kept things very tight purposefully. And then we've thought about how do we focus our brand partners on creating product experiences of some kind, which has evolved instead of a full bottle being passed around into samples that they can hand out, samples that they can mail, understanding how to do a quick product demo at their kid's sports game, at an in-person party, on a video, and teaching them those repeatable steps. But not only that, again, keeping our incentives tied to rewarding them with samples, rewarding them with product that they can demo. So we have, as part of our just everyday compensation incentives program, ways that they can earn free product samples, ways that they can earn some of our product that's more quote unquote demoable, so that you do. One of the biggest frictions to get samples out and to get people to have product on hand to demo is the cost of it. So we continue to this day to invest in getting that to our brand partners, funding part of that so that they can always have those things available.
I love that, one of the rewards or part of the incentive is essentially giving them fuel to continue to share the product and introduce it to others. I love that aspect. I think a lot of companies, might just give, a whole free bottle or something like that, where essentially you're just kind of stuffing the channel, maybe preventing people from buying that month,
Right.
or potentially in the next month. So I love that idea of using the samples to really help fuel the conversion process. Also, I think the discipline that you've had to keep it really focused, to keep the portfolio really lean, has been part of what has really fueled the growth as well, and really helps to allow the potential consumer or associate to navigate the portfolio really easily. I've been at companies in the past that have hundreds of products in the portfolio. And again, there's so much confusion, so much complexity. It's essentially the paradox of choice. It makes it really
Right.
difficult for them to know where to enter and then to go next. But that portfolio that you've created really helps them to do that. So let's shift a little bit into, again, another kind of experience, shifting out of product experience into interacting, into connecting and communicating, whether it's, corporate to the distributors or members with each other and potential customers and members. So looking back at 2020, no secret, was, hugely disruptive for all of us in just about every way. One of the dynamics I think that's kind of going to be lasting and impacted us the most is that it took a lot of these trends that seemed to be several years out and accelerated them and pulled them right up to the current day. And so for us, in this channel, it was really the virtual events, from the corporate side, from the distributor side. And one staggering stat to me is, prior to 2020, at the end of 2019, Zoom's daily active users was at 10 to 20 million. And at its peak, it's now more than 300 million a day. So essentially the population of the United States is logging on to Zoom to work, to connect, to interact. And I want to hear from you. Again, I think Neora did an amazing job of really empowering the members and helping them kind of take the lead on continuing to interact, not shutting down that sales cycle, but continue to engage. Can you talk a little bit about, how the field learned so quickly and, some of the tips you can share for some of the other companies about how successful they were?
Yeah, so I definitely agree. I think that, it took the base of prospects that understand these technologies and moved it towards us for, 5 years, because even prior to, all of this happening, we were still always been very digitally focused. And so our brand partners had always been having Zoom parties, but the difference was the prospect had no idea what a Zoom was or how to get on it or how to download it. So it's definitely removed a lot of that friction. And I think in many ways brought the consumers closer to us. Consumers in today's environment are much more, comfortable getting on a Zoom to learn about something. They're much more comfortable purchasing something online. They're much more comfortable learning about information via social media. And so we really just focused our field on meeting people where they were at and maintaining all of the things that we knew made us successful offline would be the same things that would work online. And so, going back to the product experiences, making sure that they weren't just throwing up slides and giving a presentation, but having them do demos of putting on some product, mailing physical samples in advance of maybe a party, doing a virtual spa party where everyone had their samples. They could open them, onto Zoom, and then all apply them together and ask questions. So it really forced us to think about how we could blend some of that product experiences and some of that more high touch elements. And the pitfall, I think, is that for some people think that, you can kind of hide behind technology and just post a few things on social media and, get results. And that's really not true. What's always made relationship marketing work is the relationship. And so focusing the field on use technology to create a relationship, and truly relationships that are relationships that you might not have been able to because of the wider scope, but use it to build relationships, not just market to people and sell to people. And so, they've done a great job finding that balance through that process.
That's great. So talk to me a little bit about the role that, a virtual event or product experience plays, in the decision process versus the face-to-face or the at-home meeting. A lot of people right now are wondering, do the at-home meetings even come back? I've got strong feelings on that as well, but I'd love to hear, how do you feel each of those, like, if you're considering this like your marketing toolbox or your, recruiting toolbox, how do you use virtual versus in-home or face-to-face?
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting question. And I think that, to your point about being a toolbox, that there is definitely, in my opinion, a place for both things. And there's great things that digital gives you. It gives you the ability to cast a wide net. It's unlimited geographically. Translations. I mean, there's so many things, and you can communicate information, and you can try to bring as much relationship to it as possible. But it's also about meeting people where they're at. And right now, I feel like, what we talk to our field about is, how do you feel at the end of the day when you come home from work and someone invites you to another Zoom meeting or another online thing, right? People are tired of being behind a computer screen. So that's not where they are at. That's where they have been for the past year, which kind of gives us this false, I feel like somewhat of a false sense of that's the level of productivity will always bring, because as people then start to go live their lives, how the people live their lives is also a mix of virtual and in-person. So in direct sales, we have to go where people are, and people aren't just going to be behind a computer screen. They're also going to be live in person. And so what I do think it will change is just the way we do product experiences or parties, not as much of a formal sit down presentation, but our field is already transitioning back to incorporating in-person type events. We're calling them mini mixers because, again, we want it to feel fun, because that's where people are at right now. They want to go do something fun with people that they like and have missed. And so thinking of different activities that correspond with our product so that there's an experience, for example, building, coming together and do meal prepping to build little pre-done salads for the week and talking about our weight management line, or doing sip and see results where people have a glass of wine and do a wine tasting and get pampered with a few of our products. So thinking of ways in which we can create a bigger experience that people are yearning for and blend in a product experience with it, present a little information. And that's really, we're just kind of kicking that back off. But so far, the reaction has been phenomenal. I would argue there's no easier time to get someone to come to a fun party than right now, because that's what they're looking for.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. We all have, fatigue from being, not only in our homes, but meeting virtually. So we're all looking for an excuse right now to just get together, to gather, to interact. I think all of us want that right now. I do look at it kind of over time as well, as you kind of mentioned, kind of casting that wider net. I see a time where maybe the virtual is used more, if you use kind of I know it's cliche to say, the marketing funnel analogy,
Mhm.
with kind of that colder traffic, those colder prospects, being at the top. I see it as
Yeah.
a way to kind of be more kind of prospecting oriented, to cast that wide net that you said. I love that analogy. And then kind of as they continue to interact more, after they show more intent, more desire to buy the product, as your relationship gets a little bit closer, then you can kind of bring them into the home and foster, even deeper connections. I love that kind of casting wider net analogy. So a question I have for you is, as this really became increasingly important at the beginning of 2021, and the volume of our virtual meetings really exploded. Did Neura take more of kind of a top-down approach where you had to train a lot of your members, or did they just kind of naturally do this, and then you kind of help share those best practices across the field? How did that happen? Kind of more bottoms up or top down?
It was really a blend of both. We have really good communication with our top leadership and are very blessed that they kind of work cohesively across different teams, regardless, if they're in the same team and sharing ideas. So we kind of went out of the gates with really focused on instilling confidence, like, this is fine. We have a plan. Here's the plan, and giving them a starting roadmap. But of course, they're the ones that do it every day. So they came back with a bunch of, well, this works if you do this, or this works great for a Facebook party. And so we would kind of collate all the best practices and bring them on our company calls to share those best practices and create documents and training modules from those best practices. So it was very much an iterative, I think, experience, right? We all kind of learned together and tried to just keep everyone directionally on the same path while still dropping in little kind of best practices as they were learned.
That's great. So do you see kind of ongoing is corporate's role to really help train and scale those best practices now, to kind of stay at the forefront now that we know that, these virtual events and virtual meetings are here to stay? What's corporate's role?
I think our role is to train the best practices on both sides for both, virtual experiences and in-person experiences, and get them comfortable with both. And it's really interesting because now that our field is starting to do some in-person things, you see the advantage of what they've all learned over the last year. For example, one person had a party, and instead of just having the party experience like they normally would, they created a fun Instagram reel out of it and showed all the different fun things they did at the party. And they posted that on social media. Then they had a bunch of people asking, oh, I want to be invited to the next one. So they use what they've learned on social media to generate interest back into an in-person experience. And so it's not an either or. I feel like it's very much, they kind of touch each other. And so our goal is to make sure they feel confident on both sides and have the tools and the training on both sides to be successful.
So on the corporate event side, a lot of companies are still wrestling with, when to schedule. Do we start doing in-person events and conventions and incentive trips? Where are you and Neura at with kind of this next, call it 12 to 18 months? Are you kind of doing a slow ramp up? Is this year filled with in-person meetings? Where are you at from a strategy standpoint around events?
So we will be doing our first in-person event in October. And it's not a national convention where it's, the largest scale of people, but more of kind of a power training is what we call it, 2-day event. And, it's so interesting because we've had so many people join us in the last year and a half, and you realize they've probably never met another brand partner,
Sure.
which is crazy. Yeah. So, there's so long you can go without having anything in person and still keep your culture and the relationships. But it definitely for us feels like we're kind of really needing that come together time, both for our new brand partners for them to actually experience the in-person culture, and for, our existing base to just have that fuel of seeing each other. So that'll be our first go at it.
That's great. I think a lot of companies are going to listen to this and kind of take your advice on how to end up scaling these back. That reminds me, I had a boss early on who used to say that, leaders are made at events. And so I do think getting the leadership there, getting them to experience the community, the brand, the passion in a way that they can't virtually. Again, we can all kind of try our best to, recreate those experiences virtually. But again, that same magic doesn't always translate. I'd love to kind of start wrapping up a little bit with a few questions that I kind of always ask guests and that I myself have answered. So I feel that I'm allowed to ask you these questions because I had to think about these and answer these as well. So in your role there as co-founder and chief sales and marketing officer at Neura, what's probably the one main thing that keeps you up at night?
I would say staying competitive in an ever-changing, ever-competitive e-commerce environment. So our target is to not be a direct sales company who uses e-commerce, but to be an e-commerce company within direct sales. And when you look at those two things differently, it sounds the same, but the comparison to which you're comparing yourself changes. And so when I look at who are our competitors, I don't think, just direct sales companies. I think every e-commerce company that somebody could buy a beauty, hair care, wellness, weight management product from. And what is their experience like? Everything from the website to the shipping experience to what arrives at their house to the communication that comes with it. And so we have all this huge competitive advantage in direct sales of, the brand partner, the distributor, the rep. But when you really put yourself against all of these e-commerce companies, there's a lot that we have to compete against and stay up to trend on. And it's definitely not an easy task, especially trying to retrofit that into our model. So I think that's probably the main thing.
No, I totally agree. It's not just semantic. It's not just philosophical. It's cultural. It's strategic to be, more e-commerce driven, within this channel. Again, and I think companies like Neura and others that are really e-commerce focused, that understand kind of that direct to consumer, aspect and those tactics of customer acquisition are going to have the competitive advantage that you have now and will continue to have. Those are the companies I believe, over the next, 3 to 5 years are going to be the most relevant. So thank you for sharing that. So now kind of the other side of that coin, what gets you up in the morning? How do you stay inspired, coming to the office every day, being, you've been at the same company now for a long time. What keeps you inspired?
Well, it's the exact same thing that drew me in. It's 100%, the people. And I know that sounds cliche, but it's truly, I live for serving our home office staff and our brand partners. That's what drives me every day. And our mission statement when we started was to make people better. And, I can never rest until I feel like we are reaching as many people as possible to deliver on that promise. And I think we're nowhere near that yet. So that's what keeps me inspired to keep delivering on that.
I love that. So looking back, over your career, over your life, you talked about the advice that you'd give yourself, as a brand new CMO. Is there something kind of higher than that, this one piece of advice that's really stuck out, that you would consider maybe some of the best advice that you've ever gotten? Again, it doesn't have to be just career, but what is that piece of advice that really sticks out in your mind?
One of the kind of core foundational elements for me in many facets of my life is advice that I got from my dad, and is a part of his philosophy of his book. Is he always used to say, if you show up consistently with a good attitude, you'll beat most people. And it sounds beat and not in a negative word, but you'll rise above simply by consistently showing up with a good attitude. And growing up, it never really made sense to me because I'm like, well, that seems very simple. Like everyone would do that. So how is that going to change anything for me? And I started to realize it in college. I went to the University of Florida, and the average GPA of entering students was like a 4.3, like above a 4.0. Wow. And I sat there at orientation and I looked at him, I said, how am I going to compete. And he said the same thing, show up to your classes consistently with a good, I'm like, oh, but then I did it. And, halfway through the semester, I'm like, Dad, you'll never believe it. Half these people are not even showing up. And so throughout life, I've just, there's ups and downs, there's valleys and highs, but there's very few people that will consistently show up and have a good attitude in showing up. And I think for me that transcends into, my normal life as a friend, as a wife, as all those things. And it's always held true.
Absolutely. No, that is very, very inspiring, an amazing piece of advice. Again, sometimes it is the things that are simple, but, at times difficult that can really make you, stand out in life and in career as well. Amber, thank you so much for your time, for the wonderful insights that you've shared. I've learned a lot about, how to tackle events going forward, how to create a really focused product strategy, how to be social first. Thank you for the time, and thank you for being on Direct Approach.
Thank you so much for having me and doing this series. It's great. So much value.
Well, good luck. Tell everybody at Neora hello.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.